From the north, they came not as merchants or envoys, but as conquerors, clad in bronze and wielding weapons never before seen along the Nile. They rode in thunderous chariots drawn by powerful steeds. The Hyksos, rulers of foreign lands, descended upon Lower Egypt like a storm. Cities that had stood for centuries fell in days. Temples dedicated to Ra and Osiris burned beneath foreign banners. The gods of Egypt watched in silence. They brought not only death and conquest, but strange new customs, foreign gods, and a brutal efficiency unknown to the peaceful Nile Valley. Their capital, Avaris, rose in the delta, part fortress, part marketplace, a testament to their cunning. Yet Egypt did not die. In the south, Thebes endured, isolated, surrounded and watching, and among its nobles, a child was born, a prince named Ahmose. As the land mourned under foreign rule, the boy watched the stars and listened to tales of lost glory. This is not just a story of invasion, it is the story of rebirth. For from the ashes of submission would rise a flame of defiance that would forge an empire. Thebes remained untouched, but not uninvolved. While the delta bowed beneath the Hyksos yoke, in the south, the royal line waited and watched. The people whispered of vengeance, but the rulers of Thebes chose silence over slaughter for now. Tributes of gold and grain were sent north, carried past fallen temples and Hyksos guards. Pharaohs became vassals. Sons of the sun now bowed to foreign kings, but not all bowed willingly. In the court of Thebes, resentment simmered. Nobles gritted their teeth, scribes recorded every indignity, and in the hearts of warriors, the flame of war kindled slowly. The Nile flowed as ever, but beneath its calm surface, change gathered. Among the young, Ahmose I grew, trained in war, steeped in ancient rites, and taught of every humiliation suffered by his people. He listened not only to his tutors, but to the common folk, to soldiers who remembered better days, and to mothers who wept for sons lost to foreign blades. It was a time of quiet fury, a generation of silence before the storm. And in that silence, destiny was being forged. The silence could not hold forever. In the alleys of Thebes, the people spoke in hushed tones. Traders carried more than goods, they carried rumors. Priests who once served Hyksos gods began to vanish. And among the ranks of Theban soldiers, drills became sharper, longer. The whispers had turned into oaths. It began with Seqenenre-Tao, the brave, battle-scarred pharaoh of Thebes. He refused to speak the names of Hyksos kings. His court heard defiance in every proclamation. In the shadows, messengers moved between southern cities, gathering allies in secret. A Hyksos messenger arrived one morning, bearing an insult cloaked in command. The king of Avaris demanded the hunting pools of Thebes be drained, for they disturbed his sleep. It was a calculated humiliation, and the answer was blood. Seqenenre rode to war not with an army, but with resolve. And though his life was claimed in brutal battle, his sacrifice set the course of Egypt's rebirth. His skull, later unearthed, bore the deep scars of Hyksos blades, a crown of wounds that told a nation, rise. Rebellion had begun, not with trumpets or banners, but with a whisper, and that whisper would become a roar. The death of Seqenenre-Tao was no ordinary death. It was a wound that pierced the soul of Egypt. When his battered body was returned to Thebes, It bore the savage marks of Hyksos cruelty, deep lacerations across the skull, broken teeth, wounds unfit for a king. No priestly rites could erase the rage burning in the hearts of his sons. Sekenenra had dared to stand. Now his children would rise. Ahmose, the elder brother, stepped forward. Not yet pharaoh, but already a warrior. He refused compromise, denounced appeasement, and declared war from the steps of the Karnak temple. With his sword raised to the gods, he swore vengeance. Egypt would be ruled by Egyptians again. Marching north, Ahmose struck the Hyksos like a desert storm. Their border outposts burned, their roads choked with ash. His army carried no foreign standard, only the hawk of Horus and the wrath of the Nile. But rebellion was costly. Betrayal lingered among noble houses, and spies slithered through cities pretending peace. Ahmose would not see the final victory. His life ended before Avaris could fall, but he had shattered the myth of Hyksos invincibility. The blood debt remained unpaid, but the path was clear. And in the shadows, young Ahmose sharpened his resolve. Egypt would rise, Egypt would remember. The death of Ahmose was a blow to the heart of Egypt, but it did not silence Thebes. From his brother's ashes, Ahmose rose, not just as heir, but as avenger. No longer the boy who gazed at stars, he became the lion of Thebes, forged in loss, trained in fire. The time for silence was over. Egypt would roar. Ahmose took the crown with one mission: to drive out the Hyksos and restore Egypt's soul. He rebuilt the army. Discipline, steel, and chariot tactics matched the foreigner's own. No longer would Egypt fight yesterday's war. He marched north, reclaiming cities one by one. Every step forward was a battle against fear, against doubt, against memory. The Hyksos, once thought invincible, now bled in retreat. Avaris, the stronghold of the invaders, loomed on the horizon, a city of walls, of weapons, of stolen gods. And Ahmose stood before it with the rage of generations in his heart. This was not conquest, this was exorcism, a war not just for land, but for dignity, for ancestors, for the very name of Egypt. The lion had awakened, and Egypt at last remembered how to fight. The march was long, the victories hard-won, but each step brought Ahmose closer to the heart of his enemy, Avaris, the Hyksos stronghold, the foreign scar on Egypt's land. Avaris was no ordinary city. It was a fortress, bred for war, massive stone walls, deep canals, and towers manned by archers who had never known defeat. But Ahmose did not bring fear. He brought fury, forged by generations of humiliation. The siege began with fire and steel. Egyptian catapults roared. Chariots thundered across open fields. Under the cover of night, divers sabotaged Hyksos canals. Siege towers rolled forward as the Nile ran red with battle. Inside the city, panic grew. The Hyksos, once gods of war, now saw the tables turn. Supplies dwindled, morale shattered. Avaris, once the symbol of Hyksos dominance, became their tomb. After weeks of siege, the gates fell. Ahmose entered not as a conqueror, but as a purifier. He destroyed their temples, broke their idols, and erased their names from stone. Egypt was reclaiming its memory. And in the silence after the storm, the banner of Thebes flew high over the ruins of Avaris. Egypt had cast out the invader, but Ahmose's eyes turned not homeward, but north. If Egypt was to survive, it must strike first. The empire had begun. The fall of Avaris shook the land, but Ahmose's vision stretched beyond revenge. He had not only freed Egypt, he had forged a sword from suffering, and now he would wield it against any who dared challenge its might. Northward, remnants of the Hyksos fled into Canaan, seeking refuge among allies, stirring rebellion against Egyptian rule. But Ahmose would not wait for another invasion. He pursued them across the Sinai, leading his army beyond Egypt's traditional borders. For the first time in history, Egypt became the aggressor. His chariots rolled where no pharaoh's wheels had gone. Fortresses fell before him like stalks before the scythe. In city after city, Ahmose made it known: Egypt would never again kneel. This was no longer a war of defense. It was a war of declaration. Ahmose's wrath burned like the desert sun, and in his wake, Egypt claimed new land, new wealth, and a new identity. At last, the borders were secure, the enemies scattered, and the Nile no longer wept. From Thebes to the Mediterranean, the world now knew Egypt had risen, not just a kingdom reborn, but an empire awakened. The dust of conquest had barely settled, but Ahmose saw further than victory. Egypt had not only survived the Hyksos, it had evolved. What was once a wounded kingdom had become a battle-forged empire. No longer would the Nile mark Egypt's limits. Under Ahmose, it surged forward, into Nubia, into Canaan. Tribute poured in from foreign lands. Cities that once mocked Egypt now sent gold soldiers and sons as hostages. Temples rose again, grander, prouder, echoing with hymns to Amun, the god who had guided Thebes through darkness. Karnak became the beating heart of a renewed faith, its pylons stretching skyward like declarations of power. And Ahmose, no longer the boy who watched stars from a balcony, stood tall as Pharaoh, warrior, priest, and king. He was the answer to generations of suffering, the sword of divine justice. The empire he birthed would stand for centuries, its roots deep in blood and fire, but watered by vision. Egypt had found her strength, and the world would never forget her name. The last blow had been struck. Avaris, once the Hyksos heartland, now smoldered beneath Egyptian banners. The war was over, but for Ahmose, the real work had just begun. He returned not just as a conqueror, but as a unifier. Egypt was broken, scattered, wounded by years of division. Cities lay in ruin. Loyalties had fractured, but Ahmose moved with purpose. He reinstated old alliances, rebuilt temples, and punished those who had betrayed their land. Yet, he was not content to merely restore the past. Ahmose looked beyond Egypt's ancient borders. He envisioned a kingdom not only strong within, but feared without. The campaigns into Nubia and the Levant were not just revenge, they were messages. Egypt would never again wait for war to come to her gates. With chariots and bronze, with scroll and sword, the new kingdom was born. A dynasty forged by blood, bound by vision, no longer just a land of gods and grain. Egypt had become an empire. And as Ahmose stood before the gods in the sanctuaries of Thebes, he offered not just gold, but victory. Egypt had been reborn in fire, and its light would blaze for centuries. The reign of Ahmose was more than a restoration. It was a revolution. From the ashes of war, a new Egypt emerged, proud and unyielding. His victories ignited a legacy that would blaze through centuries, inspiring pharaohs who dreamed of empire and immortality. Under Ahmose's hand, Egypt transformed from a land fragmented by foreign hands into the heart of a vast empire. The old kingdom's grandeur was reborn in the new kingdom's might, its temples taller, armies fiercer, and ambitions boundless. But the true fire of his legacy was the spirit of resilience, the refusal to bow again. His successors would carry the torch, expanding Egypt's borders, building monumental tombs, and writing stories of gods and kings whose power touched the heavens. Ahmose's war was the crucible in which Egypt's identity was reforged. His name echoed through time as the founder of an age where Egypt was no longer prey, but predator. And so, the flame lit by one prince of Thebes would illuminate history, an eternal blaze of glory, conquest, and divine destiny.